The following program is a co-production with EWTN and the Tim and Steph Bush School of Business and Economics of the Catholic University of America.
Hello, I'm Jay Richards from the Bush School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to A Force for Good. On today's episode, we meet Marcus and Kelly Daly, whose company was inspired by the funeral of St. Pope John Paul II. Their product offers words of mercy and hope to people at a moment of grief. You might call it the Casket Catechesis.
I fell in love with the Pacific Northwest, the beauty of it here. I wanted to go far away from the city, be out in the natural world doing something that was more beautiful and more connected. And so I said, oh, there's this island. And it's had this mystical place in my mind, Vashon Island. Okay, so we'll live out there on this beautiful island and we'll build little wooden boats for people and we'll sail and just have this ideal lifestyle.
Marcus and Kelly Daly met in the late 1990s while working for a landscaper in Seattle. Several years earlier, Marcus and his friend had bought and moved into what Marcus described as a dilapidated Korean grocery store with a laundromat on the other side. They gradually remodeled it. The undertaking allowed Marcus to pick up the basics of carpentry. Shortly before their second child was born, Marcus and Kelly hatched a plan to move to rural Vashon Island in the Puget Sound. They wanted to do some farming and build wooden boats. But the idea wasn't very practical. On an island of only 10,000 people, there was no market for pricey handmade boats. So they decided to return to landscaping.
So I'm in Seattle. I don't know why. I'm living in this dilapidated grocery store. I didn't really know why. I wake up there to the fact that life has some purpose and God has some plan for me, but I don't know what it is. The idea of building little wooden boats for people was romantic, but it wasn't very practical. So we started a landscaping business out here and kept doing that for a while. And then Pope John Paul II died in 2005, and we watched his funeral on television. We were watching it, and there in the midst of St. Peter's Square was his simple wooden coffin.
Just plain wood, no ornamentation, and just the Bible sitting on top of his casket with the pages blowing in the wind.
And it was such a stark contrast. It was beautiful. It was obviously handmade, but it was raw in a way, especially combined with the art and architecture of St. Peter's Square, which formed the backdrop to it, and the profundity of his life. And this little exit was just so honest. It was the same one that we all have to make. Pope, layperson, pauper. And it hit me hard because I like woodworking. I love my faith. I love Pope John Paul II. And so that stayed with me. I went to Kelly and I said, hey, we were going to build simple wooden boats for people. What if we built a different kind of simple wooden vessel for a different kind of journey? And because God gave me the right wife, she said, that sounds like a great idea. Which I can't imagine too many people saying in that situation, especially since we had 5 children at the time and we have bills to pay.
Well, it's funny. It probably should have seemed more of a risk to me than it actually did. But we'd been married, I don't know, maybe 10 years or something by that point. To me, it seemed like a natural fit. I have the easy job. Marcus does all of the heavy lifting and all the dusty work, and I just get to finish things up. Early on, we experimented with other types of materials. And then we thought of, well, you know, when Jesus was born, he was laid in a manger. So why don't we try, since we're on a farm and we have lots of straw and hay, and let's use that to fill the mats. I don't need to spend nearly as much time in the shop as Marcus does in order to keep up, because I'm busy and at home and taking care of the children.
The Dalys opened the doors to Marian Caskets in 2009. It was a rather inauspicious beginning.
The first coffin I built was for a family who had a child who was dying. And I was working on that coffin on my then youngest child's first birthday. You know, I was just kind of overwhelmed with the intermingling of darkness and light and joy and sorrow and the burden of our mortality and this poor family that was suffering. And so as I was building the coffin, I made a kind of dumb mistake with the table saw, and my hand slipped and I sawed off the ring finger on my right hand. I quickly went in and said, "Kelly, I cut my finger off. We have to go to the hospital." Each coffin takes me about 20 hours. I'll try to work regularly and build up a little bit of an inventory, but when I'm getting lots of calls, sometimes I have to spend a full day and night working on a coffin to get it out for a funeral a couple of days later. I'm trying to do less and less of that. Thankfully, my children are getting older and they're beginning to join me in the shop and taking on some of the tasks themselves and learning along the way. I look forward to the day that I can maybe have them working with me, some of them anyway, full time. I build the coffins out of pine and oak. I build them out of wood, first of all, because I'm a carpenter, but also because wood is the instrument of our salvation on the cross. Every piece of wood is different, and you can really see God's hand in it, so it's a wonderful material to be working with. I'm especially attentive when I'm attaching the handles to the coffin, because I think about the fact that family and friends will be carrying the body of someone they love, holding on to those handles, and that they'll be feeling the weight of that person. And that's something that I think cremation takes away, is the ability to really have a sense that there's a burden in life, and that it's important that we carry it, and that carrying a burden is a way that gives us extra strength, both physically and spiritually. There are a couple of things that are really important for me in the coffins. One of them is the Marion Crossed. Sometimes I just inlay a simple cross, and other times I inlay a Marion Cross, which is what Pope John Paul II had on his coffin. And I think it's just a wonderful witness and a consolation for people to remember that Mary was at the foot of the cross for the death that ended all death, and she's present with us in our suffering and our sorrow too. It's a huge blessing to, right here in my shop, have a vision for something and then see it come into actuality through the work that I do. I wanted to give people a way that they could express their faith in their funerals. So I thought maybe if I carved some sort of prayer on the coffin, that would give people a chance to give faith the last word. So I started carving prayers from the Chaplet of Divine Mercy on the sides of the coffins. And the first time I did that, I stood back and I thought, okay, something has happened here that is very important to what I'm doing. It just felt like something bigger than me had happened there. Things changed when I started carving the prayers in the coffins. It went from people saying, "That's cool, you're building coffins, that's cool," to, "Wow, I've never seen anything like that before." And I was just like, okay, I I think I've found my place here in my work. People who will call me frequently are people of deep faith with wonderful stories about their family members, or even about them sharing themselves. I get calls from people who have been diagnosed with terminal illnesses fairly often, and I get this chance to go deep into a relationship with somebody, maybe who I won't spend very much time talking to, but I get to really hear their heart and really learn something about them. So it's incredibly edifying for me in both the work I do and the prayers that I'm able to say while I'm maybe building a coffin for someone, and then also in how I am as a husband and how I am as a father, because I just see the difference that a selfless life makes in a person's death. You know, if I was a business to business, and if things would have worked out the way I saw it early on, and where I would just be building lots of coffins and I'd be taking to the funeral homes and then they would be selling them to people, I would miss out on the biggest grace of the whole thing, which is actually having a connection with the families.
Over the years, Marcus and Kelly's family has grown, and so has their business, Marian Caskets. Their message of giving faith the last word now reaches families throughout the United States. Their handcrafted caskets honor the unique value of every human life and point sorrowful hearts home to the merciful love of God. In our high-tech world, Marion Caskets might seem like a throwback to an earlier time of skilled trades and manual labor. But skilled trades still have a key role to play in an automated world. To talk about that, we're joined by Anthony Cannizzaro, Assistant Professor of International Business and Global Strategy at the Catholic University of America. Welcome, Tony. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
Well, you know, I remember, I might give away my age, but I remember having shop class in the 7th and 8th grade in junior high. And I've heard in the last few years these have just completely disappeared, at least from public schools, junior highs and high schools. Do you think this is a mistake? I mean, this complete reorientation of the type of work that people are doing. I mean, do you think that we're now at risk of really de-emphasizing the skilled trades?
So I think it is a mistake. I can tell you when I was that age, which was much less time ago, that we still had this, but it was sort of on its way out. We were going more towards these math and science programs, which have a lot of value, right? But it's really come at a lot of cost. I think the last estimate that I read was California was down to only 10% of its schools had shop class anymore as of 2015. That's problematic. And I think you can attribute it partially to our culture in the U.S. has become very materialistically focused. We're focused on extrinsic motivations such as wealth or fame, these intrinsic motivations such as the dignity of the work that you're doing.
So the stuff that's inside, intrinsic, the inside stuff.
It's fallen by the wayside.
Okay.
And it's very problematic, right? Pope John Paul II says that the value of work is not in the value of what's being produced, but in the value of the person that is actually contributing the work to society. And that's something that we've lost.
Well, you know, I've been working actually on a book and have talked to a lot of people about this fear of automation. The fear, a lot of people talk about immigration, but if you look at, for instance, what's happened to manufacturing jobs since 1980, at least 2/3 of them are the result, apparently, of automation, not of offshoring and outsourcing. Right. But what's funny is that when you're thinking about the skilled trades, so things like welding, things like hand carpentry, I mean, isn't that it's really a different thing from repetitive factory work?
I think that that's absolutely correct. But we tend, again, I think this goes back to this cultural element in society in the United States right now, that we don't value the dignity of work in general. We tend instead to value these careers that take us through the university to material success. And so we tend to lump in the skilled trades with other non-university taught skills, right? And I like to think about it like this. The things that automation really takes over are routinized and they're very easy to learn. I mean, they might be time sensitive to learn, but they're very easy to learn. So other professions that you're going to see really impacted by this move to automation is not just limited to low-skilled labor. Look at accounting right now. Look at law professions.
Right.
Those are becoming more and more automated as well, and it's creating issues in the marketplace, right? But if you look at skilled trades, those take both a lot of fine motor skill,
Right.
but it also takes a lot of what we would call tacit knowledge in the
What does that
strategy
mean?
literature. Tacit knowledge is knowledge that is very difficult to communicate via the written word. Someone has to teach this to you,
Right.
And so actually, as technology becomes more a part of what skilled laborers do, you might actually see things like apprenticeships, things like vocational training actually becoming more important because there's more for those people to learn, and they have to learn that from someone else. They have to learn by doing.
So there's a Greek distinction between knowing that and knowing how. Right. And there's all these things that we can teach computers and machines and robots to do, but they're complicated things we do with our bodies that every 3-year-old can do with his or her body, that we don't have robots that can do that. That is a sort of crucial point. But what about, you mentioned apprenticeships. President Trump has been plugging apprenticeships. Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs fame has been, has sort of made it the cause of his life, is more vocational training, more apprenticeship. And I know they do something like this in Germany, don't they? Early on, I think people get kind of split along 2 tracks. Some will go to university, do the sort of thing that now everyone's encouraged to do in the U.S. Others will go vocationally. Do you think we need something like that in the United States?
So the short answer is, do I think we need more apprenticeships? Yes. But do we need to copy the German model? I have some challenges with that, and I'll get to that in a moment. Mike Rowe, you said, is one of the people that sort of championed this, and he has a great sort of statement that he's repeated over and over, which is the role of apprenticeships in your society tells you a lot about the society and how it values work. And the absence tells you a lot about that society as well, right? And so you can tell in the US right now, it goes back again to this cultural element where we clearly don't value this work because we just don't have a lot of apprenticeship opportunities in the United States right now. Germany is sort of the exemplar for a place that has, they value these types of professions very highly, right? However, I think there'd be challenges instituting a German model here for 2 reasons. The first is institutional. The German model of industry is based very much around sort of incremental innovation, taking things that already exist and making them slightly better.
Making them more efficient.
Making them more efficient, exactly. And so they hire people with specific skills that go and then work for Volkswagen or whatever company that you want, and they might work there for a lifetime, right? And so employers are incentivized to hire someone, invest a lot of capital into making sure they're good at these incremental innovations, and then keeping them on for the long term. Here in the US, we have a more sort of breakthrough innovation model. And what does that do to our workforce? Well, our workers tend to invest in less specific skills, more generalizable skills, and our firms are not incentivized to invest in long-term training, because if the next breakthrough innovation makes that training obsolete, well then
you're stuck.
And if you think about the American worker, I think current estimates say that the average American between the ages of 18 and 40 right now is going to have held at least 10 jobs in their lifetime. So if I'm an employer, am I going to go and invest potentially $100,000 in an apprentice just to have that person leave for a competitor because they see that competitor might be doing the new greatest thing, right?
So your sense is that we need apprenticeships, we need to be focusing on this, but we don't want to do a kind of big government way, or at least the way the Germans are doing. It may work fine for Germans, but it would be, I agree, I think that would be almost impossible politically to say, okay, we're going to separate your children in the 8th grade and sort of determine ahead of time where they're going to go. So I guess the trick is to figure out, okay, how do we get more and more students that might actually be much better as welders and much better off economically than doing a BA at a local college? How do we incentivize them to want to go in this way, but without sort of the sifting that happens on the German model. That makes me squeamish, honestly, to think, I don't want to do it the German way.
And I think that you're absolutely correct. So the second challenge is political, as you said. The German model essentially is able to make this work and able to allow their employers to have highly vocationally trained apprentices come work for them because they get funding from the state in order to do so.
So they're subsidized.
They subsidize it, but the trade-off, which you alluded to, is that there's a significant lack of choice very early on. So there's this selection process that happens as early as grade school, where students are essentially tracked, not whether you want to go to university, will you go to university, or
we
will
decide.
you go?
Yeah, is this kid,
Exactly.
he's working well with blocks over here, he's bad at math, okay, so he's going to go the construction route. That is a kind of top-down approach that, different cultures tolerate different kinds of political arrangements. That doesn't seem like something that the American people would be honestly comfortable with. And so,
I think that you're absolutely correct, and I think on top of that, it's probably not going to work with the rest of the institutions that we have. What we do in the U.S. is based around this idea of freedom.
Yeah.
And it's based around this idea of people having new ideas. If we start limiting choice, we're going to start limiting ideas. It's not going to fit with our model.
Yeah, well, it's funny, thinking about Marcus Daly, he didn't do vocational training. In fact, he studied English in college and slowly picked up the skills of carpentry on the side, and then it ends up being his vocation. But I've always thought, gosh, if I was going to pick a skilled trade, carpentry and building, the Lord did that. The second person of the Trinity became incarnate, and his foster father was a carpenter, and he was a carpenter as well. And so I think, right there in the biblical narrative, this type of work has an intrinsic dignity that I think that we all ought to recognize, certainly Catholics more than anyone, don't you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. You see the concept of working with your hands flows throughout the Bible, and it flows subsequently throughout Catholic social teaching, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that sort of you're less than someone that might be going off to university and doing, higher level thinking or doing a higher level math or whatever is somehow more dignified than someone that puts together with their hands. That's a very modern way of looking at the world that I think has negatively impacted us as an economic culture. So.
Well, it's good hearing that, of course, from a professor who teaches international business. That's exactly what a lot of kids ought to do, but it's not necessarily what everyone should do. Tony, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
Yeah, good to see you. More and more goods and services are provided by machines. Does that mean that someday soon there will be no manual labor left? Machines are replacing more and more factory jobs. 5 million such jobs have disappeared in the U.S. since 2000, mostly from automation. Many fear that this means the end of manual labor. Are they right? It's true that in the next 20 years, most routine jobs will go to machines. That includes not just factory jobs, but office jobs. But it doesn't follow that all manual work will perish. Think of Marcus Daly and his handmade Marian Caskets. They cost about as much as fancy satin-lined caskets that can be found online. So why would anyone buy a simpler handmade casket? Won't a robot factory soon make Marcus Daly's work obsolete? No, because his customers aren't buying a commodity. If I want a tank of gas and every gas station around is the same except for price, I'll go for the lowest price. But man does not live by price or commodities alone. Marion Caskets appeal to Catholics, not because they're dirt cheap, but because they're unique. They resonate with Christian belief in the uniqueness of every person and the value of the body. They also connect to the Divine Mercy Prayer, to the memory of Pope John Paul II, who was buried in a similar casket, and to Jesus, a humble carpenter. This is why robots will never replace all human labor. For some things, we value the fact that they're handmade. Sometimes we freely pay more for variable and man-made than for standardized and machine-made. In the future, such goods won't cease to exist. They'll have a vastly expanded market. Think about Marcus Daly's enterprise. It appeals to a niche market. Marion Caskets would gather moss if limited to the tiny island where they're made, with a population of 10,000. But network technology like the internet has expanded to the lower 48 states. Even though Daly has barely tapped into that market, this has allowed him to turn a micro-niche product into a real business. Etsy, the online platform for handmade and vintage products, is another example of this kind of market. Etsy links small artisans to customers around the globe. In 2016, there were 1.6 million sellers and some 24 million buyers on Etsy. Similar things are happening in agriculture. In the past century, small farms gave way to giant farms. This process came at a cost. Hundreds of thousands of smaller farms disappeared. Still, it helped all of us over the long run. We got more food at much lower prices and more time and resources for other pursuits. But no one expected what's now happening. As the price of food has dropped, the desire for quirky, organic, and locally grown products has soared. At first, these were luxury items. Now they're more widely enjoyed indulgences. Just think of the burgeoning market for microbrewed beers, grass-fed beef, pampered pork, free-range chickens, specialty cheeses, small batch whiskey, urban gardens, and locavore farmers markets. Here's a prediction. As the number of routine jobs goes down, the demand for the unique human touch will go up. That's it for today. I hope our show has helped you notice how your work can be a force for good in the world. Thanks for being with us. I'm Jay Richards. See you next time.